Today on the FYA Interview Series, we've got one of my favorite people on earth. It is Kat McRitchie, and Kat is a lifelong Memphian. She works now for the Memphis Teacher Residency, where she is also a graduate and worked for years in education, still working there now. And on top of that, Kat also works with the Moms Demand Action group. She's in charge of the Memphis chapter of that. We'll get into all of what they do and who they are, as well as just talk about maybe some advice. There's some things that Kat's got to think about for people who are in that young adult season of life. Super interesting interview, and we're glad that she was able to join us today. Hope you enjoy it. Check it out. Kat McRitchie. All right, welcome to the FYA Interview Series. We're here with Kat McRitchie today, and Kat has been a longtime friend of ours. And when I think about Kat, what you've brought to our friendship over the years, I think of amongst most of those things, just Memphis knowledge and being always one step ahead of us on not just new things that are here, but like the history of Memphis and all of that. So why don't you tell us about growing up here and talk about your childhood a little bit, like where you grew up, what your family was like, all of that.
Sure. So I grew up in Midtown Memphis in the 80s. The Coliseum and wrestling days of Memphis history, an illustrious decade if ever there was one.
For sure.
And my dad ran the trauma center here in Memphis, which was at the time the third busiest trauma center in the country because it was the only one sort of in the whole region.
Yeah.
And so I would say one thing I grew up, I've got 3 brothers and a sister, so we're a busy family. What I like to tell people about growing up in Memphis in the 80s in my family was that my dad saw sort of the most traumatic, worst parts of Memphis in his job. But my parents and a lot of people who grew up in Memphis in the 80s have really negative experiences and views of Memphis. And I didn't know that people didn't love Memphis until I was like in college, and I was like, what do you mean? This is the best city in the world. And it was funny because my parents always spoke well of the city, and we always went downtown and we would just do different things. And I never knew that Memphis wasn't the greatest place in the world, but also my parents didn't grow up here. And so we always were raised with sort of like, you might stay here or you might go somewhere else. And it wasn't sort of necessarily home forever and ever. So I think one of the more interesting things about the way I was raised is that I was raised the great, an asset-based mindset of Memphis, but also Memphis wasn't the center of the universe. And I have discovered that those are not a common combination.
Yeah, that is super interesting. I mean, I feel like my uncle's in Cincinnati, for example, and has been a firefighter forever, and is a habitual Cincinnati basher because of that. And so when you talk about poverty with him, you immediately dive off a cliff because he's just been through his job serving the most difficult cases in the city for years and years. And so it's interesting that your dad was, why do you think that was that way? Why do you think they still like the city so much?
I don't know. I think a lot of it has to do just with their own upbringing. My dad grew up in a farm town in Ohio, and my grandparents were always just positive people. My grandmother was always doing for everybody, and my grandfather was always just doing the next right thing before it was made popular by Princess Elsa. And my mom was just grew up in a blue collar town in Michigan, and they just sort of always made do. And so I think that they just had this make the best of where you are and be a part of where you are, in their upbringing. And so they just brought that. I think neither of my parents has a strong faith background. And so for a long time I resented that, that, I saw all these friends with evangelical backgrounds or high faith backgrounds. And I resented that. But the older I get, the more I realize these other sorts of worldviews that actually are very biblically themed. And I just am now realizing sort of this my own faith narrative and my upbringing like actually have a lot more overlap than maybe in my 20s I
Yeah.
was aware of.
Yeah, that is super interesting to me. And so, what was the point for you? How did you get introduced to uh, well, I'll say Jesus, because I know you were in church a lot growing up, but
Yeah.
not like a Protestant church, right?
Yeah. Well, so I have a very stereotypical Southern salvation story, which is hysterical since you know me.
Right.
Uh, I was saved at a Baptist summer camp in Arkansas.
Praise His name. Praise His name.
And
See,
all
God,
of
that's how.
all the ways. You know that movie was out a few years ago? Like literally that's my sort of faith origin story of
That
this
is
like
hilarious.
aha moment.
Right.
When I go back and think about my story beforehand, I sort of see all of these. Well, the Catholics call it prevenient grace, which is the
Yeah.
act of God and of grace to you before you are like able to respond to Him. And so I could tell you lots and lots of examples of prevenient grace, but that
Yeah.
salvation moment was an old Baptist summer camp in Arkansas.
The only thing that would be more surprising about that than to me is if it was like with your cheerleading squad. Like that's the only thing that could.
No worries there. I was the most school spirited in high school, but I was not a cheerleader.
Well, I've been to a Grizz game with you, so that connects to me. Like that. Which side note, hearing your mom at a Grizz game might even be might be the only thing better than hearing you at a Grizz game, because it becomes clear where all your passion comes from.
Oh, she's committed.
Your passion for injustice has started.
Oh yes, no.
Through that for sure.
The worst was at my brother's wrestling matches growing up. My mom would video if the guy who did the video wasn't there, and you'd hear, "Go, John, go! Rip his leg off!" And you're like, "Mom, chill out." The video, you could see anything of the wrestling, but it was classic because my mom's video skills and commentary and commitment to cheering was inestimable.
That is awesome, and also that a 100% transferred right to you.
Yeah, pretty much straight away.
Okay, so when you were, you grew up in private school and then you shifted to public school. Tell us about that decision and why you wanted to go to public school after being in private school growing up.
Yeah, so I went to Catholic school, went to IC grade school through the 7th grade, and it's more complicated than is worth telling for school transitions.
Yeah.
But I played the violin growing up,
Oh.
and I was part of the youth orchestra, and I had a lot of friends that were in public school, specifically at White Station. And so I basically just begged my parents to let me go to White Station when in the 8th grade, and they let me. And I was the first Fabian to not go to private school. And I mean, my grandma thought I was going to hell straight away because I wasn't going to Catholic school.
Oh wow!
So she has that in common with the Baptist grandmas.
I never knew it was that big of a deal in your family for that.
Oh no, it was a huge deal.
Wow.
So
well, shout out to your parents then for letting that happen.
Yeah, they were pretty awesome. And I
And
think
then
that was, of all the decisions they made for me, sort of the most personally transformational decision that they made for me as parents, I would say.
Why?
I think because I just had like cross-cultural relationships for the first time in meaningful ways. And so, I mean, optional school has all kinds of problems in it, but you also just have a lot of different kids with a lot of different backgrounds in a building together. And like kids are kids and they'll make friends with whomever. And so I would just say, like, I know my whole view of Memphis, how I relate to people, I mean, how I interact with culture, a lot of that goes back to White Station. And also like some of my deepest friendships are with girls I went to high school with too.
Yeah. Well, and I feel like your graduating class or the people that you were there with have now like taken ownership of the city.
Yeah, it's definitely like you look around and you're like, oh, I know you. I know you.
So when you're getting done with school and you're trying to figure out now where to go to college, how was there any kind of family pressure on you to go any particular place, or were you kind of free to just go wherever you got in? What was that process like for you, and why'd you choose where you chose?
I would say in my family, like the greatest idol is education. Like learning itself is important, but like sort of academic elitism is ingrained deeply in my family, and all of the competition and shame and anxiety that comes with that. And so in my family, it was sort of like, you'll go to the best school that you get into. And that was like, among the top schools in the country. And so I wanted to, but I wasn't exactly the same as all my siblings. But when it came down to it, I was deciding between Duke and Rice and Northwestern and Georgetown. And the honest truth is I chose Duke because they had the best basketball team. So I always tell people I made my college based on basketball. And I'm not even 5 feet tall. So people are always like,
and if you leave that to the imagination, people are going to be like, my gosh, she must be amazing at basketball.
Amazing.
That's awesome.
Amazing. And actually, the best high school girl in my high school was Simone Mizell, whose family goes to Fellowship. Her brother goes to Fellowship. And she's about my size, and she's freaking amazing. So.
Oh, wow. Okay. Well, yeah, Muggsy Bogues and all that. There's a long history of shorties doing well. Yeah. Okay. So when you get to Duke, what changed about you? Like how did Duke shape you, and what were the things that you kind of left there with that you had not come in with?
I think there are sort of two big things. Well, three things really. I was a history major, and I discovered just a love of learning on a whole new level, like just learning for learning's sake, and was sort of freed of the academic elitism and the pressure of being in school to be perfect, and being in school to learn at the highest levels. It was a rough transition with a lot of counseling along the way, but that would be like a long-term impact of that. The second was it like exploded my worldview. I was a part of the Navigators Fellowship at Duke, which was a really diverse and internationally diverse group. And so just sort of blew my understanding of God's heart for the world, and busted sort of ideas of American exceptionalism for me from a faith perspective. And the third thing was I started out interested in education and then quit because for a lot of reasons. And then Durham and Memphis are really, really similar in a lot of ways. Durham's a lot smaller than Memphis, but just was able to have experiences with kids in my youth group and what sort of came back to the idea of education, and just education as a means of equity for cities and for individuals, and for like cities, creating equity within cities would be sort of a third thing I learned in college.
Yeah. Okay. So when you're starting to get close to being done, well, at what point did you get involved with SOS? Was that during college?
Yeah, that was
with them in high school at all?
Yeah, I was peripherally involved in high school. Between my sophomore and junior year in college, I was on summer staff, and that was, again, sort of understanding of God's heart for the poor and what it means to be a follower of Jesus in that way was certainly a big part of SOS. Yeah, and SOS is a big part of our family. Yeah,
and obviously at some point that becomes not just following Jesus, but also following a guy that you had met there as well.
Yeah, this tall, skinny, cute guy with a funny accent. Dan, God bless him. I met, so two funny stories about Dan. My husband, we met the very first day at SOS at Holiday Ham and Deli right there at Poplar and Aaron. Was the meet and greet, and I couldn't remember his name, and he thought I was some just crazy jerk. Because I couldn't remember him, just par for the course. And then he really caught my attention when he knew the names of all of the tools in the toolbox the next day. That was what really won me over and got me.
That's so awesome. Oh man! And so, did y'all? How long before y'all started dating? Did y'all start dating during that summer at all, or was that?
We started dating at the end of that summer. Yeah.
Okay. And how long did y'all date before you got married?
That's a good question. 5 years. Yeah.
Okay.
We dated for 2 years during college and grad school, and then 2 years, 3 years out. So yeah.
Okay. Okay, got it. So you get done with Duke, and then did you come straight back to Memphis after that?
Yeah, I came straight back to Memphis and taught middle school at White Station Middle School, my alma mater.
Okay.
And then we had been dating for a year, and I realized I didn't like teaching middle school. And so we were dating. We had been dating for 3 years at that point and didn't sort of really know if we wanted to get married. And so I moved. I have family in Michigan, which is where he was living and where he's from.
Yeah.
And so I moved up to Michigan for a couple of years and worked in. I had sort of sworn off education, mostly because I didn't like middle schoolers, which I just discovered. And I worked. They're just like 2-year-olds, 2-year-olds and 12-year-olds. Just not for me. Just work through those phases. It'll be fine. But so I sort of leaned into community development. I worked for 2 different community development corporations.
Okay.
When I was in Detroit, and then when we got married, we came back to Memphis. It was sort of like, do we stay in Detroit? Do we go back to North Carolina to the Triangle area, or come back to Memphis? Which are the 3 places that we sort of had family or friend bases and opportunities for jobs, and we decided that Memphis was the best place to for our family and our faith and our jobs. It just made the most sense.
Yeah. Okay. So when you moved back, how long was it before you got involved with MTR? And then how was it different moving back as an adult after being gone for some time, or did it feel pretty natural?
It was different. Well, sort of both. So when I first moved back to Memphis, we were living in Binghamton, right near where SOS is. That was really important to us, being sort of part of intentional community. And so that felt that was what my experience had been in Detroit too. And why I'd lived in Binghamton right out of college. So that was a pillar of our sort of beginning marriage. So I was working at Grizzlies Academy, which is different than Grizzlies Prep is now. Okay. Grizzlies Academy was an overage for grade high school. And so I was teaching high school to like 18 and 19-year-olds, which was super fun. And I discovered I did like teaching and I did like kids. It's just not the 12-year-old variety of them.
That's awesome.
And so, so that sort of, and then, so Grizzlies Academy as a school closed, and I was pregnant, and sort of at the same time. And so that's when I came, and MTR had just started. So I came to MTR, that was in 2010. So I'm finishing my 10th year working at MTR this summer, or this spring.
Man, that's awesome. And what drew you to MTR, and why did you believe that was worth your time getting involved in it?
MTR was, I would say 2 things. The mission of MTR is Christian love expressed in equal education. And that seemed like a marriage of sort of what I believed about community development and about education as a road to equity. Then the vision of MTR, I get too confused, is restored communities living with dignity and in peace. And that was just, that's always been an image, like a strong biblical image to me of what restored communities looks like. So, and I also, realizing the difficulties of being a teacher, really, really strongly wanted to be part of supporting teachers so they could be more effective. And so all of that sort of came together at the same time.
Okay. So for those who don't have a framework for kind of what MTR does, or why there's even a need for that to begin with, like what was the need in Memphis like, and why did MTR need to be here? Why was it important work that you were a part of?
My favorite. So bye, Evie. Love you. So Memphis has about 150,000 school-aged children, and you can go to memphistr.org to see all the stats, but essentially 80% of 3rd graders aren't on track to read, which means they're not on track to graduate, means they're not on track to do work beyond school, which means they are on track to live below the poverty line. So the overwhelming majority of 3rd graders now are on track to live below the poverty line as adults. And just realizing that that's like something that's personally, growing up in a family and with a background where education was really important.
Yeah.
It was important to me to be involved in that work, and to, I think as a person of faith, I believe that God is most present among the most vulnerable. And so if I'm looking at Memphis and I want to be about the work of God, all I need to look is who is the most vulnerable, and how can I partner with them to create equity.
Yeah. So in your 10 years there, is there something that you feel like has been most transformative in you seeing that work on the ground? Like, is there something that you feel like, man, once I can look back now, I can see this one side of me really developed in this work, or I see like this big part of this work in particular is most important. Like, what have you learned during your time there?
I think, and this is, I would say there's this idea of dignity, and that like the resources exist already within communities. So like I said, the vision of MTR is restored communities living with dignity and in peace. And I remember one time when I was teaching high school girls who are overage for grade, overwhelmingly they have these just incredibly traumatic, sad stories. And walking with some of the students I had at Grizzlies, I remember having a conversation actually with David Montague, who's the director of MTR, my boss now. Like, if you could give your kids one resource, if you could change one thing for them, what would it be? And I remember telling him dignity. Like, I just wish I could give young women dignity. And so it's like they have this inherent value, and they have so many skills and powers and talents and beauty. Like, they have so much potential, and that's actually like within them. They just don't believe it. And like this, like the idea of dignity to being this missing piece. I think that's like, and I've seen that realized over and over and over. And so as I work with teachers, if we can figure out how to like just convince kids, or even to get them to imagine their own dignity, it unlocks all of these other pathways. And I would say, I do this gun violence prevention work too. And one of the things we're learning about city gun violence is all these things that work. And one of the biggest things that work to stop city gun violence is like working with those at greatest risk of being victims or perpetrators of gun violence, and interrupting violence like before it even starts, like building up communities. And what I've learned is there's all these experts and academics and policy wonks who say this is what the statistics say that actually reduces gun violence. And when you go into communities, the experts in all of those things, how to actually do them, are the kids, the big brothers and sisters, and the candy lady, and the youth worker at the community center. And there's all of these like experts with this like unbelievable wealth of information, which, it reduces gun violence, but it also is like these pathways to dignity for kids. And so, I would say over the last 10 years, what I've learned is that this magic solution that we're looking for is frequently already in the communities that have greatest poverty. So, but figuring out how to get the people with the money and the policy and the power, recognizing that and making the two, like that is a miracle, and that is a magic. I don't know the answer to that one, but I know where it is. I just don't know how to get there.
Okay, so maybe along those lines, have there been moments where you've seen that work, and like what are some of the examples of places that you've seen that work at? So maybe we can try to pour gasoline on that.
So I think one place I see that working is with the work of Charlie Caswell in North Memphis, Fraser. Charlie's, do you know Charlie?
I know of him, but I would love for you to tell us about him.
So Charlie Caswell is a saint among men, and he's just an average guy. He's about my age, maybe a little bit younger than me. Grew up in Memphis, sort of, stereotypical Memphis background. Got in trouble as a teenager, but but he now is a pastor and runs a community development center in Fraser. It's called Legacy of Legends CDC, and he's also trained with the ACEs Foundation, which ACEs are adverse childhood experiences. It's just it's a way of measuring and directing childhood trauma, and treating or approaching childhood trauma. And so Charlie, I coached some teachers at MLK Prep, and which is the old Fraser High for people who are familiar with Memphis, and they have some of the most traumatic, most difficult stories. The culture in the school is just sort of staggeringly bad compared to a lot of schools and I've been in a lot of schools over the last 17 years. But his ability to come in and talk with kids, students, and administrators and teachers, and sort of speak almost like as a translator, speak the language and the needs of each to the other is, and I think it's like an untapped resource, but the way that it's funny, I'll tell teachers, you need to call Charlie Caswell, connect with him. He knows your kids. If you call him, it'll help you. And then I'll say, okay, fine, I'll call him. And then, 2 months later, I'll get like, Charlie Caswell was in the school and he was awesome. I was like, oh, what's it now? Tell me about it. What did he do that was helpful? Which is a little bit.
Did you hear about him again?
It's like, oh, amazing. Dude, you check your email 2 months ago. His phone number is in your email address or in your email account. But which is fine. Whatever.
Sure.
But
right.
It is fun to see. And I think that that's an undeveloped resource. But I think that's like an example of how the church and the community and the school and can just sort of come together to work for everyone's success and good.
Yeah. Okay, so you got involved a few years ago with the Moms Demand Action Group, lobbying against gun violence, and this is going to be a stupid question, but why? Why did you feel so compelled to get involved with that? And the reason I ask why is for you to give a framework for people at home, like you don't have any free time anyways, because you're a mom of 3 kids and a wife, and you work, and there's, you have a life as well. So what was so compelling about the cause that you felt like it was worth rearranging your life to give a portion of it to this cause?
That's a great question. I would say there's 4 reasons really. The first is my dad, I grew up with my dad running the trauma center. And so I saw, it was very common at my dinner table for surgeons to talk about gunshot wounds at the dinner table. So I just was sort of always aware my background noise was talking about gun violence in Memphis growing up.
Okay.
In the way that like farmers' daughters probably are, crops rotations or whatever that background sort of conversation is.
Yeah.
So I was just always aware of that. And the longer I realized that sort of Memphis was my place, the more I cared about our own particular issues. The other part of that would be that when I was teaching in Memphis, I walked fortunately when I was teaching, none of my students were actually shot and killed, although I've walked that with a lot of teachers over the last few years. Mm-hmm. But I watched them walk through death rituals. So like, somebody that they grew up with or were cousins with or friends with would be shot and killed, and everybody knew what to do in the same way that we would like get ready for prom. It's like, oh, you buy a picture with the airbrush t-shirt and you pick the color that's going to be the funeral color, and everybody gets this, and then this day we do this, and we have a vigil here, and then and so just realizing that gun violence for my students and for my neighbors, because I was living in Binghamton at the time and walked through this with our across the street neighbor, just realized that like gun violence was so normalized in our city and for the kids and for my students and neighbors that it was just bizarre and not okay. But it like had become normalized, but it was not okay. Does that make sense? And then honestly, when May started public school and pre-K, she came home from school talking about this game they'd played in the bathroom one day, and they had all to go to the go in the bathroom, and they played this copycat silent game with their teacher, and their teacher, they had to be totally silent, and their teacher would do something silly and they would do it back. What I realized is she didn't know it because she was 4, but she was describing a lockdown drill to me.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I just sort of realized for my, I was affected by my neighbors and students sort of becoming normalized to gun violence, but also my own kids who have all of the privilege in the world to sort of protect them from that. It was also a normal part of their sort of American child experience. And that was, that sort of those two factors were my sort of, this can't go on anymore. And at the same time, Moms Demand Action was just getting started. Moms Demand Action started as a Facebook page a mom in Indianapolis after the Sandy Hook shooting started it as, what can I do to stop gun violence? And she wanted to, she organized a Facebook page with a goal of organizing 1 million moms and passing a universal background checks bill. And so that's how they started. In Tennessee in 2015, we passed guns in parks, so that in the state of Tennessee, a municipality cannot disallow guns from public spaces, from city parks. And so that was sort of the legislative action that really was the catalyst for Moms Demand Action's growth in Tennessee. And sort of that coincided with my own kids starting school. And so that was sort of the perfect storm that got me off my couch and doing something.
And so in particular, what are you doing now to help with them, and how, like, what does that look like on a daily basis?
Yeah. So right now I'm this chapter leader for the state of Tennessee. So Moms Demand Action has chapters in all 50 states, and we have about 6 million supporters across the country. And so in Tennessee, there are about 12,000 supporters of Moms Demand Action. That's anyone who's ever taken an action, signed an online petition, or attended a meeting, or taken any sort of action is how we count that. And then we have a leadership group of 153 moms across the state, and dads. I'd say also that we're mothers and others. We're led mostly by women, and we're started by a mom, but it's a movement of all kinds of people. So I would sort of add that disclaimer. I lead, there are 11 local groups across the state, and I help coordinate their leadership. And what we do is we lobby for common sense gun bills in the state legislature, and we work with local groups. So right now we're working on a coalition here in Memphis to reduce city gun violence, to bring community partners together who all are stakeholders in reducing gun violence. We do a lot of public education campaigns about gun safety, sort of if you choose to have a firearm in your home, what can you do to safely secure it so that kids don't access it, and so that you're aware of the risk of suicide because of the presence of a gun in the home. And so we do a lot of public education also around gun safety. We are very much like we believe it's possible to support the Second Amendment and the right to bear arms, but also bear them responsibly in a way that is for the public good of all. Yeah.
Okay. So that's a lot. It's a lot that you have going on, right? What's maybe the best next question is, what is something that has made you extremely happy lately that you've seen in the city, and then something that's made you extremely mad lately that you've seen in the city?
In this city, I think the thing that makes me extremely happy right now is, I think particularly in this moment of this COVID-19 crisis, is, and this is a very Memphis thing, is resilience. And working, like the last 2 weeks I've been on the phone with teachers thinking of how do we connect with students, and how do we connect them with resources, but also how do we continue to engage them with the learning that they were literally created for. Like, it's not just what can they get to eat, but like, I believe sort of my philosophy of learning is that God creates learning as a way for us to know him. Like, as we learn, we will recognize who created us. And so as teachers, like we have this pathway as we build critical thinkers and readers and learners and questioners. Like we're literally creating access to truth and to worship just by activating kids' minds and pushing them. And so thinking about how teachers can connect with students and with all the limitations, and also like continue to give them that access. And just watching teachers and watch hearing stories of parents who are frequently like dismissed from the conversation, like heavily invested in their kids' learning, and actually this shift in the pattern and routines has like created pathways for parents to be involved in kids' learning, even in high needs, high poverty, low literacy homes. Parents are sort of having these new educational experiences with their kids. And I think that's such a Memphis thing, right? Like the whole grit and grind, resilient. Like we are a resilient city. Throughout our history, we have over and over and over stories of resilience. And I would say that this moment in the city, and that is certainly not to dismiss the inequity, like it should not be this way. We should already have a plan. But within the injustice, it brings me hope that people are resilient for their kids and for education.
Is one connected to the other? Is the happiness now connected to the anger as well?
Which brings me to, yes. You see how I segued there?
I love it.
I think particularly the thing that is making me the most angry right now is those who are in power, who are generally only convenienced by this crisis, making policy and directions, whether they're at every level of government making directions and policy, or even like people in the workforce, people who are leading businesses, making decisions and suggestions based on their own experience, and being totally blind to the fact that their experience is not the majority experience, and like not meeting the real needs of people who are most affected, and like people like that whose success is most important for all of us. Like if just the wealthy and privileged get through this, like that's not actually okay. And actually they will eventually suffer. It might take a while, but like we all, like our success is bound up on, and the success of every single person in our community. And so I think the thing that I've been angriest about in the last 2 weeks is just for those without margin, how this is completely devastating. And for those with margin, we get all this, and I do the same thing, and it's actually helpful, like how to spend time, what to bake, how to help your kids. And that's true, but there's also a huge blind spot, and it's helpful. Like it's like legitimately helpful, but also that without the awareness of sort of everybody who doesn't get to choose what to bake, or whether or not they go to work, or which screen they should give their kid from 10 to 1 is,
or 2 or 3.
The gap is overwhelmingly frustrating.
Okay, before we go, couple other questions. Like I said at the beginning of the podcast, you're one of the people that we always go to for restaurant recommendations or talk about food that's happening in the city. What's your favorite place that you ate at before getting locked down? And then what has been something that let me start there. What was your favorite place that you've eaten at recently before quarantine happened?
So my favorite place recently has been Putt Food Hall. A little biased because my brother makes the pizza there at Dojo, but he got laid off this week, so he doesn't anymore. But I think it's the best pizza in town, and it's just a fun place to hang out and go. We can get a beer or coffee, and the kids can get gelato, and somebody can get tacos, and somebody can get pasta, and it's all just great, reasonably affordable food. And just a fun time to be down by the river, downtown, and walk around. So that's my current favorite Memphis eating, pre-COVID-19 eating place. See if it's still after.
No, I'll vouch for the pizza because you told us about Dojo Pizza, and we we went down and got some, and it was unbelievable. And
Yes.
so that doesn't help people now that your brother's not there
Yes,
anymore.
I know.
Um,
Well, he'll
but
be back if he's furloughed, whatever that means.
once life
Uh,
starts again, yeah,
yes,
yeah,
the breakfast
yeah.
pizza especially would be my top recommendation. It's
Okay,
unbelievable.
okay, good to know. And then, has there been anything this past week that was amazing that happened at your house? Like you guys made something great, or what are you guys doing to stay sane during so much home time?
So much home time. I think the church answer is we've been celebrating Lent in our own way. And it's been really sort of a sweet time for our family. Um, and that's true. And it's been really fun. I
Yeah.
think, just being outside has been pretty awesome. I think the two kid-centered things are my 7-year-old is obsessed. David is obsessed with paper airplanes right now. And so he's been madly making paper airplanes of all shapes and sizes, and he gets online and and then the kids and Dan will like go outside and see who can shoot it the farthest, and they make
That's
these
awesome.
charts and they tweak them. So that's been really fun. My current favorite school project is we're building a town, and each kid's building these little different elements of it, and so it's really one of the tasks is everybody had to make a monument, and so they had to choose. When we talk about, as history teachers, we talk about like what do we want to remember, what do we want to honor in a community, and what we choose to honor like reflects our values and what we care about, how we want to be in a community. And so we've been talking about that. It's been really interesting to see each kid and what they chose, and it's like so perfect. Like May chose, my oldest, hers is Equality for All Park, and her monument is
awesome.
They have to do a park and a monument, and her monument is a giant Supreme Court gavel with "I Dissent" on the side because she's obsessed with Ruth Bader Ginsburg, which I just adored. I was like, all of the gold stars. You may just be doing this to butter me up for more Girl Scout cookies, but
sure, it's working.
They're yours, kid. And then David's is really sweet. The person he chose to honor is Vincent Van Gogh, and because he read about him in a book, and David has a lot of big feelings that he doesn't quite know how to handle, and he also loves art, and so he read in a book essentially that Vincent Van Gogh made art to process his feelings, and that was an outlet for them. And that was why I chose him, and I was like, well, that's really beautiful. I did not tell him that Vincent Van Gogh died of suicide at like 37. So
God,
we're gonna just keep that on the TL. Needed to make more art, I think.
Sure. Yeah.
I love the inspiration. And then Cora, who is just, well, Cora, but for your listeners, she's the happiest child in the universe. She has Friendship Park, and her monument is a globe with kids holding hands all around the globe, which is just very Cora. She has a garden in her park and a pond, but it's been really fun to see. It's been fun to sort of be part of their learning in ways that I don't get a chance to during the normal pace of life, which again is a privilege, but it's a privilege I'm not taking for granted, which I think is
for
what
sure.
I'm trying to sit right now is recognizing our privilege, and enjoying and being grateful for the time that we have, while also remembering and working on behalf of people who aren't as privileged.
Yeah. That's awesome. All right. Last question before we go. I've been asking some of our guests, what would you want to the old classic question, what would you want to either go back and tell yourself as a young adult to better prepare you for this season, or what advice would you have for those that are kind of in that season of life and are working toward, the stage of life that we're in now? Like, what would you have wanted to know, or what would you tell them at this point?
So many things. I think what I would like to say, that my answer today is be gracious but not lazy. And so what I mean by that is that a lot of times we can hold ourselves to too high standards, or take in all of these inputs about what we should be, or whether it's social media or from boss or family or friends or whatever it is, or even scripture if we're reading it with a certain mindset. But to be gracious with ourselves and others, and to assume the best in that. Like we're all sort of trying, maybe not all of us, but overwhelmingly people are just trying to do the right thing, and get by. But I think that the downside of that is to do nothing and to let anything go. And so I think that there's this balance of, while you're being gracious to yourself and to others, like have expectations, like hold hope. And there's this balance of, like, there's, so many scriptures where God says, like, rest and essentially I'll fight the battle for you. I'll do the work for you over and over and over. He says this to his people. And I think there's like rest in that, but also like they're able to rest because they've showed up for the battle. And so he doesn't say like, stay home and I'll do it. He says like, come put on all the armor, get all ready, walk around the city, do all the things, be in training, walk across this continent.
Yeah.
He doesn't say
and
that
I'll be your fuel.
Yes.
Yeah.
He says like, show up and then I'll be there and then I'll take care of it. And so I think that I need both. I still need, but certainly in my 20s needed to hear both of that. Like, you don't have to do all of the things, but you do need to, you need to show up and be present.
Yeah, that's so good. I mean, those are all the things I did not do during that phase of life.
And it is funny. 30s or 40s are for, right?
Just correcting those mistakes. I know we talked a bunch of different times about the other piece of advice that we both assigned to people is just get married as fast as you can with whoever's available at the moment, and just kind of lock that down because you can't be happy otherwise.
Oh, yeah, definitely don't do that. I always tell people, and I love and adore my husband, but I always tell people, I wish I hadn't met him till I was 30.
I mean, you know me and you know Elizabeth, and what, like that's not how I feel. Like I'm still like at 22, even when I go back, I'd still be like, okay, can we get married? Can we get married? Let's get married. Let's get married. Let's get married. But it was that was the person, like that was my person, like that. And once I saw that, it unlocked this whole different side of me that was able to then do all the hard work required with getting married at that age and not being ready for life yet and all of that. I was willing to do it because I had found the right person. So anyways, that's awesome. Well, Kat, thank you so much for just like unpacking all that for us and sharing with us today, and tell us where we can find information on what you're doing with moms and where we can find information on MTR. So
online at momsdemandaction.org. And if you want to follow specifically our work in Tennessee, we're on Facebook at Moms Demand Action Tennessee.
Okay.
And on for MTR, you can go to memphistr.org and check. And we're on all of the things. Memphis TR is the social media handle for all of the different platforms.
Awesome. Well, Kat McRitchie, thank you so much. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks. Take care.
A comment one day.